If I choose to gift somebody the most beautiful, precious thing that you could ever gift another human being, then that is my choice. And instead of condemning me, you should be applauding me for the strength that I have, for the galls that I have, for the heart that I have to want to help somebody and do that for somebody else.
Family building is supposed to be easy, and it can be a shock when it's not. The roller coaster ride of infertility can be a mix of emotions and conflicting advice along the way. As a reproductive endocrinologist and former fertility patient, I not only help patients build families every day, but I remember what the ride was like for me. Hang on tight as we learn together from experts and share stories from infertility warriors with compassion. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, and this is Baby or Bust. Of all the ways to build a family, surrogacy can be a complicated process to begin and certainly surrounded with many misconceptions. My patients need surrogacy for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's obvious when the female partner doesn't have a uterus, and sometimes it's the answer to the end of a long infertility journey. But always in the discussion with my patients, one of the first questions they ask is, how do we get started? Here to answer that question and many more is Eloise Drane, owner of Family Inceptions, egg donor and surrogacy agency, and host of the wonderful Fertility Cafe podcast. Eloise, thank you so much for being here.
Oh gosh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You not only have donated your eggs and been a surrogate 3 times, but you now are helping intended parents and surrogates and egg donors find each other and help people build families in the way that you've done before. And I want to ask, what exactly is surrogacy? There's a lot of confusion around what that means.
Yes, there is. First, let's define 2 types of surrogacy. There's traditional surrogacy, and then there's gestational surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is when a woman carries a pregnancy, but that she also has the genetic link to. So it's her eggs that they're using, and it would get fertilized with the husband's sperm or the intended father's sperm or maybe a sperm donor. In a gestational surrogacy case, it's where the gestational carrier is carrying a pregnancy for somebody else. She has no genetic connection to that embryo at all. So somebody's egg, somebody's sperm is then fertilized and then transferred into her uterus. So that's the difference. And I think there's a lot of confusion because a lot of times they see on movies and, this woman is going to be a surrogate for us and she fell in love with a husband and now she's killing the other lady and, all of the crazy stuff they do. No, that really is not surrogacy. It's the furthest from the truth of what surrogacy is.
And I think that traditional surrogacy, so that's where the person that is carrying the pregnancy also uses her egg. So there is a genetic connection. That was more common in the past. I personally have never done that type of treatment, and I've been in practice for 10, 15 years. It's very difficult when there's a genetic connection. So I think when people say surrogacy, I just think they get confused. But just to clarify, the vast majority of the time, the person carrying the baby is not genetically connected.
Correct.
Okay, so when we say surrogacy in this podcast, that's what we're talking about.
Right.
When I'm talking to my patients, I say, hey, let's talk about surrogacy as an option. You're exactly right. And so no wonder people get confused because we're kind of saying it and using it in different terms. That's just an example of one of the many misconceptions and confusing things that comes up with this incredible family building option. When I'm talking to my patients about family building options and we decide that surrogacy is the right next step, one of the first concerns that intended parents have are, why are surrogates doing it? I think there's a big misconception that it is all about compensation and they're worried about finding people that are going to be, misleading in their goals, and they're really nervous about finding that right person.
Yeah, and rightfully so, right? If you were in their shoes, you would be just as concerned as well. The majority of the surrogates that decide to become surrogates, they really do have a giving heart. They want to help. They really want to do something for somebody else. Not to say that everybody has those motivating factors. There are surrogates that money was their first factor until they learned more. And then when they learned more, then they realized what exactly they're actually getting ready to do and the importance of it. But then there are still other women that also are trying to do it solely for the money. And those are the women that you really don't want to work with because they're extremely difficult to work with. Also, when you think of surrogacy, you also need to realize that these women are really putting their lives down. They're putting it on hold for the benefit of somebody else. I've had women who have missed funerals of family members. I've had women who couldn't go to siblings' weddings. I've had carriers who can't attend their children's functions and just do everything because they can't leave the state or they're on bed rest. I've had other women who have been in the hospital for weeks at a time while her children are being cared for by somebody else for the benefit of these intended parents. So it goes both ways. It's not a one side, oh, because I'm doing it for you, you should hold me in higher regard, or, oh, because I'm the parent and this is my child, you need to adhere to everything that I say. No, it's a 50-50. This is definitely a partnership.
So I can say in my personal experience in talking to surrogates and asking, how did you get interested in this process? How did you learn about it? I'll say the vast majority of the time they've had a friend or a family member that's really struggled with fertility, and absolutely they're compensated for everything that they're doing and the life that they're putting on hold. But there always seems to be an underlying purpose. Are there ways for intended parents to figure out that someone might have ulterior motives or, early in the process, look for warning signs for that?
See, that's where an agency would come into play, because that is the role of the agency in the beginning. We try to go through and pre-screen this woman to make sure that she really does have the right motivation. When the going gets tough and you have to take progesterone oil injections every day for weeks and weeks and weeks, you're going to continue doing it because you know that there is an end goal that everybody has agreed to hopefully achieve. So that is definitely, I think for me, one of the biggest things of why it's important to consider working with an agency. Is it going to be a compassionate surrogacy journey, or is it going to be a compensated surrogacy journey? And a compassionate journey, most likely you know that person. So you already have a relationship with them. You already have a understanding of who they are, their backgrounds maybe. You have a bit more insight into their life. You also know that they're truly doing it for the right reasons, right? Because you're my best friend and I want to do it for you, or you're my sister and I want to do it for you. But in a compensated journey, maybe it's not necessarily because of that she knew somebody that had infertility. Maybe she saw it on TV. I mean, people are starting to talk about infertility and their journeys and their experiences and what they're going through. And people see that and they resonate with them and say, you know what? Okay, I saw her, I feel for her, and I want to help her.
You spoke about a case, the 1998 Baby M case, where the surrogate had a genetic link to the child. She was a traditional surrogate. It was her egg. And she really got connected and wanted to keep the baby. And I think this is every intended parent's worst nightmare. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story?
Sure. This baby M case, this woman agreed to carry a child for this couple. She was a traditional surrogate. And after she had the baby, she decided that she wanted to keep the child. It was a long battle back and forth, and the intended parents got to keep the child. However, the birth mother got visitation rights.
She kidnapped the baby after.
Yes.
And so that the headlines are, hey, if you're thinking about surrogacy, by the way, this surrogate came back and kidnapped the baby. And so you better be careful and don't do surrogacy. Oh my gosh.
You don't hear about all the wonderful, beautiful cases of surrogacy. There's thousands happening every year. You only hear about the two bad ones. Now, traditional surrogacy is still occurring. There are still states where it's happening, but it is definitely not a common thing any longer. This is one of the reasons why. With gestational surrogacy, unfortunately, there are, funny enough, more cases of intended parents not coming for their children than there are of surrogates trying to keep the children. And not to be insensitive, if you think about it, these women, they have to be able to carry a pregnancy. So why couldn't she just go and have her own then? You know, there is no genetic link to her with this child that she's carrying. Now, it's not to say that as a woman carrying a pregnancy, whether it's your genetic link or not, you are going to love that child. You would not be human if you didn't carry a child and nurture a child and care for a child for 9 months. That relationship is only between you and that child, nobody else.
And I think that we learned a lot from that case. I think there's a lot of stopgaps, counseling between all parties, legal documents to be very clear about who the intended parents are. It doesn't mean that things don't come up, but I think we learn a lot from that case. And I think that it's just important to know that a case like that is what leads to the movies and the sensationalized storylines, but that's really not the norm.
No.
And not is what's happening. And you brought this up. There are cases on the other spectrum that are still sensationalized cases where, as a surrogate, you would fear that while you're pregnant, the parents would change their mind. The intended parents would change their mind. And a great example of this is Sherry Shepherd. I remember when that was in the news. Do you want to tell us about that story?
She and her husband decided to have a child via surrogacy. He evidently didn't have any children, and she had one son. And so they went through an agency and found a gestational carrier to carry a pregnancy for them that was genetically related to her husband, but not genetically related to her. So they used donor eggs. During the pregnancy of the surrogacy pregnancy, they ended up splitting up and getting a divorce. And her thing was, well, not my child, not genetically related to me. I don't want anything to do with it. It was a court battle that pretty much said, no, this is your child. You're the one who decided to do this and create this human life. And now you are responsible. And I believe she's still having to pay child support or something.
You know, in the movies and on the sensationalized stories, it's always the carrier that gets attached to the baby and doesn't want to let go. But it's also shocking to think about all the work that it takes to go into planning and, quite honestly, paying for this pregnancy to happen and then changing your mind while the pregnancy is happening or even after the baby is born, and then relinquishing those parental responsibilities. Like, that's actually really quite shocking as well. And I think you do such a good job of really trying to emphasize how important it is to do the work up front to try your best to avoid these sensationalized situations.
Yes. Taking your time, not rushing into it, and it goes on both sides. When you decide to become a surrogate and you're so excited and you want to get matched and you just want to hurry up and get everything done. And then the intended parent side where, you've gone through hell and back and you're just ready to have your baby. You have finally agreed, like, okay, we can do surrogacy. I'm okay with it. I'm trusting that this is going to work. And you're so excited to get started, and then you jump right into it without really doing your due diligence. And that's where mistakes happen. And that's why the ASRM and a lot of fertility clinics and everybody else talk about the importance of mental health and making sure that you have consultation with a mental health professional to talk about some of the things that you may not have even thought to think about. And on the surrogate side, to really make sure that she does really have good motivating factors and that she can figure out how to deal with the emotion roller coaster that she's going to probably go through. Not because she's intentionally doing it, but you're pregnant and there's a lot of hormones. So
Another misconception I think that gets perpetuated and really adds a lot to the stigma around surrogacy is that people are doing it just for vanity reasons. Like you think about the celebrities, like, oh, Nicole Kidman or Sarah Jessica Parker, they must have just done surrogacy because they wanted to keep their figure or not miss out on this incredible movie opportunity for their career. And it can't be farther from the truth, but can you talk more about that misconception?
Because they're movie stars, they're not women, and they don't have a uterus and ovaries and potentially the same medical problems that we do, because we have somehow said that they're behind a screen and so they're untouchable and they must not, experience anything else. I mean, that's the reality of what we're saying ultimately. And I think it's unfair. Who would want to wish this upon themselves? I don't know anybody who's like, yeah, sign me up for infertility. Nobody wants to do that. And I'm sure a lot of them as well didn't necessarily want their lives in the limelight like that so that everybody knew what was going on. When I decided that I wanted to be a surrogate in 2006, first of all, it took a year for me to explain to my husband, for him to finally understand about why I wanted to be a surrogate. And then after I explained it to him, then it was explaining it to my Catholic mother and then trying to explain it to my dad. And these are very older school generation mind thinking. So it has definitely evolved over time as well. And I think it's about time, too, that people's misconceptions begin to evolve.
What are some of the things that your mom said to you when you said, I'd like to be a surrogate?
Oh, goodness. She was just like, why am I playing God? This is definitely completely against all of our beliefs. And I am a very spiritual, faith-based person. And for me, it was actually the opposite. For me, it was, this is all God. Because even though you as the doctor, as the reproductive endocrinologist, you can only do so much. Once it's in that uterus, you have no say. Surrogate has no say. Intended parents have no say. None of us have control. We can only go so far. Then he has to take over. So my thing is, every single child, whether they were created by IVF, whether they were created by donor eggs, whether they were created by surrogacy, whether they created by sperm donor, it doesn't matter. If God did not want them here, they would not be here, period. I know there's been a lot of cases of people and talking about how surrogacy is exploiting women and we're taking advantage of women. And I was a surrogate. I have an MBA. I worked for corporate America until I decided to own my own agency. I did not need to do it for money. We owned our own home. My husband has a very well-paying job, and I had a very well-paying job. I did it because I wanted to help somebody. Nobody forced me to do it. Nobody told me I had to do it. And luckily in the United States, we have the autonomy of our bodies to choose what we would like to do with our bodies. And so if I choose to gift somebody the most beautiful, precious thing that you could ever gift another human being, then that is my choice. And instead of condemning me, you should be applauding me for the strength that I have, for the galls that I have, for the heart that I have to want to help somebody and do that for somebody else.
And I love your personal perspective and passion and drive to do this. Even before it was, as you said, now it's much more common and talked about, and even on the cover of People magazine. For your motivation, it was just a beautiful way to help another family.
I actually started off first as a kidney donor, and I gave my cousin a kidney in 1998. I went to visit him in California after I did the donation, and I happened to find an ad or somewhere in a magazine in a mall, and there was an ad for egg donation. I was like, oh, I could probably do that. I already had 3 children. So I reached out to the agency and told them like, hey, I would love to be a donor. And they were like, yeah, great. You would be a great donor. The only problem is Black women don't have infertility issues.
Oh, such a misunderstanding.
I'm like, well, if somebody ever, calls you, just let me know. So 9-10 months later, I get a call. And that there's a family that would like for me to donate for them. And I was shocked because remember, I was told Black women didn't have any infertility issues. And what did I know? I mean, there was not really anybody around me that had issues that I knew about. They're the experts, right? But then they finally called me, said there was a family, and I flew out to do the donation for them. And it was actually really not the greatest experience. It was like, okay, fine. I did the donation. And really what I was expecting to feel was the same feeling that I had when I gave my cousin a kidney. And it was just this feeling of truly wanting to help somebody else for the benefit of that person. I didn't get that though, that time. And so it was kind of disappointing. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe I was completely wrong about that or whatever. Then fast forward again a couple of years, and I ended up seeing an ad for egg donation and surrogacy. And I was like, okay, fine, let me just go ahead and do it again. But this time, I put my information out there, and then intended parents were contacting me directly. It wasn't no longer through an agency. And then it was different. And then it was raw and truly feeling people's direct connection of, this is why I'm doing it. I've been longing for a child for so many years and so on and so forth. So I went on and helped a number of families and still friends with a couple of them to this day. I've met my egg donor babies and it's been amazing. As a matter of fact, this past November, I spoke to another one of my egg donor babies for the first time. Why am I going to be embarrassed about something that's the most beautiful thing that I can do for somebody else? I loved being pregnant. I loved having the baby move and all of those experiences. And so for me, and I had easy pregnancies for all 4 of my pregnancies. I didn't even have morning sickness. I paid for it for each of the surrogacy pregnancies, but I did it with my own. And it just goes to show you how different things are.
What's the relationship like between you as a surrogate and the intended parents?
I first thought about the type of intended parents that I wanted to work with. And that would be someone that, I wanted to have a close relationship with, and I wanted them to experience the whole thing with me. That's why I also decided that I wanted to find local intended parents. We just hit it off and it was great. We did have to attempt 3 times for it to work. I did actually get pregnant the first time and it ended up in a miscarriage. And the second time it wasn't successful. And then the third time they transferred 2 embryos and both took. And I ended up having twins.
I've never known how to ask a surrogate this, but having a miscarriage is physically draining, emotionally draining. I care for so many women that have had miscarriages, but having a miscarriage as a surrogate, I feel like it's this added layer of, oh my gosh.
I boo-hooed probably more than the intended mother. They were like, it's okay. Because what I was thinking was, oh my God, they only have a certain amount of embryos. And then after that, they don't have any more. And I was the one who was carrying this pregnancy. Oh my God, what if they think I did something? What if they think I harmed the baby somehow? Or I took my medicine all the time. And, when you go through, did I miss something? Did I do something? Was it something I did? Or, did I sleep the wrong way? Should I not have sex with my husband last night? You think all of these things, all of these thoughts run through your head because the majority of these surrogates, you truly have handed these people your heart. They may not necessarily know that or have realized it, but you truly have handed them your heart as they are handing you their child. That's why I'm saying you have to be willing to consider each other's perspective. Now it's how much money can you get? Who is paying the highest compensation for the intended parents? It's because of COVID. Well, I don't want her to go anywhere and I don't want her to do anything and I don't want her to live and I don't want her to, and it's like, but she also has a family. She also has a life, as well as with the intended parents of they're in fear of their child's life every single day. Again, it goes back to both have to be willing to consider each other's perspective. That way you can empathize with each other and meet each other in the middle.
And I love that you're bringing back the humanity and trying to help people realize the purpose, because when it does become completely the legal or the, transactional piece, pregnancy is full of risks and surprises and things that you just might not even know that could happen. Having that human connection and understanding, it's not just a legal document, it's also kind of finding that right connection.
Yes, definitely. And why it's so important to take your time and not jump into it. I try to break down just the different pieces that one needs to consider on both sides. First is termination. That's always the first. What is your position on termination? If you're even going to hint to think about it, then you need to work with somebody who is completely open with you as the intended parents, making any and all decisions. If you are a surrogate that is, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, then you need to be on the side of caution and say, you know what, I'm just not going to terminate. It is so much better to have these discussions up front. Everything, unfortunately, is a gray. It's no black and white. But when it comes to making these decisions, you have to make a black or white decision. And that's what makes surrogacy so difficult. That's the first thing, is termination. Second thing is, well, what kind of relationship do you want to have? How in depth do you want this thing to be? There are some intended parents who want to be as involved as possible. Hopefully one day when the world opens up, they can attend all of the doctor's appointments. For my first surrogacy experience with my intended parents, they attended every appointment.
But I just am trying to wrap my mind around being a surrogate and having that connection with someone else and that level of responsibility to care for that child as best as you can. It's truly a special thing.
And that's why that relationship is important. And another thing too to also consider is personalities. Sometimes it may be going back to, doing it for money and why some people's personalities may warrant that. And maybe it's not necessarily for them just about the money, but the money is a very important factor because they also realize just the magnitude of the responsibility they're about to undertake. So you can't also fault her for wanting to be compensated for a very, very humongous responsibility she's about to endure. Yes, she shouldn't only want it for the money, but the fact that she also wants it for the money is also okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about how to have realistic expectations of the timeline and just very general, although I know it's a complicated process, just some of the big steps that people can understand that they need to go through to get to that goal?
The first thing I would suggest is that intended parents look into different agencies. There are plenty out there to choose from. Do your due diligence. Consult with several of them before you make a decision, and then go with someone that you feel the most comfortable with. The next thing you need to be aware of is that right now there is a waiting time for finding surrogates. It's not you call right to the agency and immediately you're matched. COVID has put a damper on everything, including women wanting to become surrogates. It's a big responsibility. And so for many of them, they weren't considering surrogacy. They're more worried about how they're going to deal with their children. So you have to give time to find a surrogate. And at this point, it could easily take up to a year in some instances. But once you find your surrogate, expect to have a match call with her so that you guys can get to know each other. You'll be able to see each other's profile, decide that you want to move forward. Once you do, you want to make sure that she has completed her psychological evaluation. And you, as the parent, also should complete a psychological consultation. And then we suggest completing a joint psych consultation as well.
Sometimes intended parents think that we're judging them and that the psych eval is like seeing if they're fit to be intended parents. Can you explain that that's not the case?
The intended parent psychological consultation, and I always emphasize consultation and evaluation so that people can recognize there's a difference. The surrogate is getting evaluated. She gets a pass or a fail. And obviously, you want to make sure that she is mentally sound to take on this huge responsibility. Whereas with the intended parents, it's a consultation. It's to make sure that you understand the process. There are going to be things that you won't even know to know. Having those consultations with this mental health professional who has training, who has understanding, who has the knowledge, can help you think things through that you may not have even thought to think about. It's not there to evaluate you to determine if you're going to be suitable parents. We already see you're suitable parents. Nobody is going to go through these endeavors and all of this pain and the grief and the financial undertaking just because you want to get a child to, mistreat. Everybody knows that you're suitable parents. It's just making sure, are you really ready? Have you really thought all the things through so that you can also enjoy your own experience doing surrogacy? I typically tell everybody, once you pull the trigger and say, I'm ready to do surrogacy, give yourself 2 years. That's probably like dread in some people's ears right now, but give yourself 2 years. Because here's the thing. The worst that can happen in 2 years' time, you have your baby. So give yourself 2 years. Whether it happens a year from now, whether it happens 2 years from now, you're not going to love that child any less. This is what we did to get you here because that's how much we loved you. I had the pleasure of caring for a same-sex couple my third journey, and they documented everything. They wanted to share this experience with their child, just like all of us do at some point throughout our lives. However it goes out, we all do that.
But how about setting expectations for the financial role or the cost?
Unfortunately, this is the hurdle for probably the majority of families that want to have a child is the financial aspect. Right now, you could budget anywhere between $120,000 upwards of $200,000 for surrogacy. Just to break it down real quickly, just the surrogate's compensation, you're looking at $40,000 to $80,000. Then you have to factor her medical care, Does she have insurance without a surrogacy exclusion? But more and more insurance companies are adding exclusions onto the policies. So that means that she has to purchase a different policy, which means you have to pay for that. You have to cover that as well. You have to cover a life insurance policy, because the last thing you want to have is something happen to her and then somebody come after you for that money. And then you also have to consider, well, what if she has lost wages? What if she's homebound and she has childcare and home care and somebody has to help her? And all of those factors also have to come into play. Then you also have to add in the professionals. Okay, there's agency costs, there's legal costs, there's psych costs, there's escrow cost. All of that adds up. There are fertility financing companies now that people can apply to. We work with a company that does up to $100,000. There's grants. Now, unfortunately, even though there's grants, there's also hundreds of others trying to also get the same grant. Most grants pay out between $5,000 to $10,000 maximum. You need to look into your insurance companies through your employers and find out if they're willing to pay for anything. If they're not, you need to put away your fear, your thoughts of, oh my God, I can't go there to my HR and tell them. Yes, you can. You can go to your HR. You can let them know, I am an employee here. I do everything I'm supposed to here. And you, as HR, should also care about my health and my well-being. Well, my fertility is part of my health and my well-being, and I'm having issues. If it was an employee who had cancer, you would pay for their cancer treatment. I have infertility. You need to also help pay for my infertility treatment. We need to stop being afraid to speak up.
How can our listeners find you?
They can go on to our website, which is Family Inceptions, and everybody forgets the S at the end, but Family Inceptions with an S.com. Or they can listen to our podcast, which is called Fertility Cafe. And then all of our social media channels at Family Inceptions as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate your being here, Eloise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here today. I truly enjoyed learning from Eloise Drane all about surrogacy. She provides such a unique perspective, being both a surrogate multiple times and now helping others build their families in this way. It can be so easy to be frustrated by the time and even expense of building a family through surrogacy. Eloise helped us learn to focus less on the transactional nature of building a family through surrogacy and taking the time to enjoy this important family building option. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, and this is Baby or Bust. If you like this episode, let us know. Give us a 5-star review and follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Baby or Bust is produced by Mark Ramsey, Jamie Solis, and Greg Moga. Executive produced by Paul Anderson, Nick Pinella, and Andrew Greenwood for Workhouse Media. Baby or Bust is a Mark Ramsey media production.